What's up, folks? And just wanted to go ahead and talk about something real quick. So last week, we had an interesting post from Ethan Evans, who's a retired VP of Prime Gaming at Amazon. And this was an unusual bit of insight into kind of some market strategies that happened at Amazon with a specific department and with the way they went to market in a specific new venture. And this is going to be kind of gaming focused. I'm going to talk about the gaming industry and specifically Steam, as in that is what Amazon set out to compete with, was they were going to go ahead and challenge Steam. And we're trying to figure out why they couldn't beat it. And while this is going to be heavily gaming focused, it's going to be talking about that corporate strategy, that market approach, what Amazon tried here, how it was a little bit different. And it should be really insightful for all of these larger companies and how they approach all of their individual markets. So, not just gaming. So, bear with me here. But we'll jump in the post. And again, this is Ethan Evans. Put out this great post. And it's one of those things where as soon as I read it, I couldn't stop thinking about it. And then it kept popping up in other spaces I'm in as well. So I'm going to touch on some of those, but let's actually look at the post. As VP of Prime Gaming at Amazon, we failed multiple times to disrupt the game platform Steam. Before we continue, what is Steam? Long story short, Steam is a store. It's an online store where you can buy video games. I believe exclusively on PC or the small handheld computers that Steam is putting out now. Um, and Steam was made by the game developer Valve, most famous for the Half-Life series from the 90s and later, but mostly the 90s. And there are a couple of key points there where the company started out as a gaming company. They started out trying to distribute their products, and they got into Steam as a way to just be a platform to sell this stuff, as kind of a replacement to the brick and mortar stores. And they solved a couple other problems on the way that are really good for customers and make it a really strong business model and are why it's so successful now. I wanted to touch on that. We'll actually look at Steam in a minute, but let's finish the post first. We were at least 250 times bigger, and we tried everything. But ultimately, Goliath lost, and here's why. And I want to touch on that too, because talking about the size of Amazon is, it's important because that talks about what resources they have and how successful they've been. So they can look at a new market and say, we have all the resources we need to break into this. But anytime you're approaching a new market as a startup or even as a really big company like Amazon, you're going into that industry as a newcomer. So even if Amazon is really good at doing what they do, that does not mean they're going to be as good as Steam at being a game store. And so they are basically on even footing with your average startup here, aside from being able to self-fund. But and this is a really interesting piece to make because their assumption is we're good at our thing, we have a lot of money, therefore we'll be good at this too. And that's an easy assumption to make for leadership at a lot of these big companies, and it's an easy mistake to make. And if you approach the market that way, assuming you're going to be successful because of who you are, that really can hold you back and prevent you from actually seeing what's right in front of you. So the 15-year long attempt to challenge Steam started before I was VP of Prime Gaming, but we never cracked the code, not under my leadership or anyone else's. The first way we tried to enter the online game store market was through acquisition. We acquired Reflexive Entertainment, a small PC game store, and tried to scale it. It went nowhere. And that's similar to what we see from some other companies. Most larger gaming companies out there have approached this as an acquisition type deal. They buy multiple studios that make games, so they have their individual small subset teams that make different games and franchises. That's one of the more common approaches, and it's one that's come up quite a bit in this, and it kind of made sense as an approach. But that's not all there was to it. You can't just buy one game maker and assume that it's going to work. Then, after buying Twitch, which is a streaming platform, which is where a lot of professional gamers, that's a real thing, play games live and have people subscribe to their channels and give them money to keep playing the games. It's an interesting market. We created our own PC game store, which is Prime Gaming. Our assumption was that gamers would naturally buy from us because they were already using Twitch. Wrong. And that assumption doesn't make sense either because Twitch isn't a game store, it's a streaming platform. It's like YouTube. Nobody goes to YouTube expecting to buy movies, right? Anyway, finally, we built Luna, a game streaming service that let people play without a high-end PC. Around the same time, Google tried the same thing with their product Stadia. Neither gained significant traction. The whole time, Steam dominated despite being a relatively small company compared to Amazon and Google. Again, it is small compared to Amazon and Google, but in this space, the niche market it's in, it is the 10-ton gorilla. It's the incumbent you have to challenge. It's the one you have to actually kick out if you want to succeed in this space, or compete with directly if you want a significant chunk of that space. The mistake that we underestimated was that we underestimated what made consumers use Steam. They didn't do the market research. They didn't fully understand what people were using Steam for. It was a store, a social network, a library, and a trophy case all in one, and it worked well. At Amazon, we assumed that size and visibility would be enough to attract customers, but we underestimated the power of existing user habits. We never validated our core assumptions before investing heavily in solutions. The truth is that gamers already had the solution to their problems, and they weren't going to switch platforms just because a new one was available. We needed to build something dramatically better, but we failed to do so. And we needed to validate our assumptions about our customers before starting to build, but we never really did that either. Just because you're big enough to build something doesn't mean people will use it. And this is the part that people are really focusing on. James Bircher's guest newsletter appears very good. I'm sure this is great, so check that out too. But this is really the part I wanted to focus on and talk about. And it's really interesting to read this too, because this is somebody looking in hindsight at an effort they made as a major company, examining the assumptions that they made, and right out of the gate, this emphasis is a little bit misplaced. Because if we look at Steam, and again, we will in a second, it does two things really, well, three things, excuse me, really importantly, and it solves these problems. Number one, it's a store. First and foremost, it is a store where people go to shop for a specific type of products. Number two, it's a storage solution where instead of having a stack of CDs or discs on your desk somewhere, you have everything stored digitally that you have access to no matter where you are. And then finally, it is a social network in that there's a friends list where you can become Steam friends with people, see what they're playing, and easily find each other if you want to play games together, which does help with the stickiness. Because if your friend network is there, it's hard to move to something else if it doesn't have that friend network. And now, initially, I read that line and read it as them misunderstanding what Steam is, but it does cover it. There also are achievements in there that are public, so that trophy case piece worked too. But that last bit is really important as well. It worked well. It solves these problems in a clean, efficient way. It works. I've never seen Steam go down. It may have, but very briefly. And it's a good product that meets needs. And those are kind of the things we really want to highlight here. So we look at the different approaches that Amazon took. So they bought their own game store. Okay, they bought a store. That's great. It didn't solve the other problems. Didn't solve that online game store storage issue. It didn't solve the social network bit. So there's that piece. And then there's Twitch, where they bought Twitch, which is a streaming platform, assuming that would be a way to reach gamers as a market. And they're not wrong. I mean, people were aware, the Twitch users were aware that Amazon bought it, but that wasn't something that was going to move them to the Amazon gaming platform, especially, and this is important too for these big companies, they need to understand this because they had an established customer base with Twitch. They bought it and they immediately started making corporate decisions that were pretty negative for users. There was stuff where they were paying less to creators. They were making it more expensive to subscribe, more challenging to subscribe, more difficult to find individual channels. So they bought this thing expecting goodwill, expecting a customer base, and they kind of broke it. So they took something that was working really well and could have earned a lot of goodwill with this customer base, and they made a lot of decisions for maximum profitability that made people not like it anymore, and specifically dislike them for taking something that had been good and making it worse. And that's a huge point for all of these. If you're trying to break into a market, you have to approach that market as if they are consumers and you're making a good product and you want it to be customer centric. People don't like all the moves that they made, and so that actually built a negative impression rather than the positive one they were going for. And then finally, we built Luna, and this is particularly interesting because it also mentions Stadia. This is the idea that instead of installing games on a computer, instead of having the hardware at home, you'd run off remote servers at Amazon and you'd be able to run faster games without needing the hardware. And this is an interesting approach. I think there is something to this, but there are a couple caveats. And we're going to specifically talk about with Stadia in just a second. But the big thing here is the market they're trying to get is the people who invest in their gaming, who will actually buy hardware and will actually spend money on games. And the people who are going to spend money on games already have the hardware. If they're not going to spend money on the hardware, they're not going to spend money on the games either. So by targeting the specific subset of the market that already wasn't spending money, that was, and you can see why this is the final approach, because it's the last ditch effort, right? And now this could still work. Say somebody's traveling for work, for example, and they have their work computer, they don't have their gaming rig, whatever. They're up at night and they want to play a quick game, they could using this, but that's an edge case. And if they do that, it's very unlikely they're going to spend money on stuff in that game rather than wait until they go home to their rig and actually do it there. So we've got a lot of resources thrown into this where they didn't fully understand the market, where they made some significant missteps in these steps. So they didn't just make the wrong steps, they did them in a fairly negative way, like a bull in a china shop. They just rolled in and were like, we're going to do this our way and people are going to like it. And people didn't. So let's go ahead and keep going on here. And one of the more interesting pieces of, well, actually, let me touch about this real quick. There's one comment I really enjoyed on this that stood out a lot about that market research piece about understanding your market. It's from Gunjit Singh here. And he said the Delta 4 framework by Kunal Shah. The whole idea is that whenever you make a product, you have to set people down. You have to do some market research. You have to set users down with both the product you're trying to replace and your product and ask them to give it a score out of 10. And if your product doesn't score 4 or more points higher than the incumbent, it's not really even worth it. Like that is the quality improvement goal or the user experience goal you're trying to get to actually beat an incumbent. That's a step that gets skipped a lot, skipped a whole lot, because it can be tough to find your market and get in touch with them if you're not already a part of that market. So I really appreciated Gunjit's comment. It really nails that you want to make sure that people are going to like your product before you invest in it. And that was especially interesting here too, because this, and I read this post, I really enjoyed it. I was like, that's cool. And I didn't think about it as much until I saw it start popping up in other places, such as Reddit, where a lot of gamers are a sarcastic and sassy bunch. So this came up, and then the comments are really telling, but I wanted to highlight the general trends among the comments. The number one biggest comment was, I didn't even know Amazon was doing this. This is one of the largest global social networks for gaming, one of the largest spaces where people go to find news, and most of the people here didn't even know that this was happening. And if you want your market to switch to your product, you kind of have to let them know about it. And there's another comment too, I believe it's right on the top here. Uh, yeah, even Google Stadia had better marketing, saying that Google Stadia had bad marketing and people heard of that and they hadn't heard of Prime Gaming. And the original post mentions they've been working on this for 15 years and gamers didn't even know about it. Their market didn't even know about it. And that's kind of funny. I mean, it's dark funny. I shouldn't really heckle there, but it's one of those cases where it's clear they didn't understand their market. They didn't know what they were getting into. They didn't know what they were doing. Sorry. So yeah. So the commenter there was that consumers didn't even know about Prime Gaming, even though it had been in the works for 15 years, which is uh, that's not good. That's not good. And then there's another highlight here where you also have to understand that these are consumers in a digital space that have been at this for a long time. Like your high spending gamers are probably adults, very professional adults who have a lot of resources and are familiar with this stuff and are looking at multiple platforms. And I'm going to backtrack real quick. One of the single core problems that all of these companies make when they approach this stuff is they approach it from an outlook of exclusivity. Say, we're going to make the best platform and everyone is going to use our platform. And every single focus we do is going to be on making sure they use only our products, only in our space. That is a huge misstep to make in something like this. When you're getting into a market, you can't immediately assume people are going to come to your store and never leave. If you do that, if you say, this is what we have and that's it, every time people walk into your store, you're giving them a reason to walk out. You're giving them a reason to leave to go somewhere else to find another product they're looking for. And that's hugely important here. That all of the competitors, in the title of the video, I plan to say that the reason that none of these companies have ever beaten Steam is they didn't really try. They threw money at it expecting to be successful right away and didn't really give it a good effort. They didn't see what Steam was. They didn't see the consumer base. They didn't really try to beat it. They just assumed that they would. And it's one of the core things where Steam is a game developer, Valve is a game developer that owns Steam. They make these games, they also work on these games, but the bulk of what they do is they're a storefront where they have shelves that developers can pay to have shelf space and sell their products. And it works really well. And they don't say, hey, you can only play our games. You can only play Valve games. They say, use whatever game you want. But yeah, so that I wanted to jump into that. But then talking about gamers as a smart consumer base, and that's not true of every single gamer, but enough. And gamers do talk. It's a social base, and all of this gets shared out. And there are some really damning things in here that Prime Gaming offers free games as an incentive to get people on the platform, but those are games that are free from other gaming platforms. So Good Old Games, GOG, is one of the more famous platforms out there for restoring old games and making them approachable and playable in modern machines. They've got their own niche for that because if a developer abandons a game, Good Old Games gets it, brushes it off, and says, hey, you can pay a little bit to have this as you remember it from when you were a younger gamer. And they offer free games too. And what Amazon Prime Gaming was doing was using their free offers and saying, here, we have free games too. And they did the same of Epic Store, which does the same approach. They offer some free games too. So they were taking free products from other sites and pretending that they were free on Prime Gaming. And that's going to hoodwink a lot of customers. But for the folks that see it, that will leave a really sour taste in your mouth where it's like, you're not trying. You are not doing anything unique. You're not doing anything fresh. You are taking free offers from other places and you're pretending that they're yours. That's bad. That's very bad. And that's one of those approaches that you need to avoid because you will get caught and it's going to look really bad. So, yeah, literally had no idea Amazon was even doing this after 15 years of trying. So, I'm going to go ahead and keep going. We're going to look at, well, actually, we're going to look at Steam itself real quick. And I want to be really clear to talk about what Steam is. So, again, I've talked about this. It is a store. It is a space where you can find games from different developers from all over the place, from a lot of different ages. They're not just new, they're not just old. It's a mix of stuff. You can find old established games from nostalgia. You can find the brand new, latest and greatest too. So it covers a really wide range of shoppers and consumers in this space. Does a really good job with that. And then you look at this interface, it's very clean, it's very smooth. They've got their event banner at the top that tells you big events that are coming up or big releases. There's their featured and recommended section that shows some of the newer products that are out, just like your end cap at a store when you walk into the front. And then also, we touched on how Amazon Gaming and Stadia both tried to approach the market, and they tried to get the people who can't spend the money on a high-end gaming machine, which is a good approach. And the way they did that was trying to do streaming gaming. The way Steam has done it is they produce their own handheld gaming device, a little kind of Nintendo Switch-esque tiny computer that their interface and their games are designed to run on. And they've done a really good job of supporting that just as another avenue to reach a different subset of gamers, the ones that don't spend as much money on hardware, but still get them. And one of the funnier things is that the people that use this are, and similar to I was talking about someone traveling for work, the people that use the Steam Deck are people who usually also have a high-end gaming computer. I'm assuming, I actually don't know that, I shouldn't assume. But most of the people who have the upper end handheld hardware also have the upper end desktop hardware as well. So it's doubly damning on Amazon's market approach that they didn't look for the correct subset of customers, the ones who had money, the ones that were spending money. But yeah, and just to look at this, so it's simple interface. I've got toolbars up here on the top. I can look at things. They've got news. There's test content. They're very friendly to indie developers. So small developers can get on here and start using Steam as a place to get traction for their games. And it helps promote the industry as a whole. And of course, Steam gets the benefit because if something takes off, there's that brand loyalty that companies like we took off on Steam. And players know, like, hey, I found this on Steam, and Steam supported this group. So that's one of those goodwill things that or that Amazon fumbled with Twitch. And so I keep touching on some of the same points here. This is consumer focused, it's industry focused. There are things in here where they support the industry as a whole, both developers, publishers, and players, in a way that's very holistic, where every single part of the infrastructure benefits, and Steam is just there selling shelf space. If you look at it very simply, that's still what they do. And of course, you got the points shop that no one cares about. There's categories of games. You can look at different games, new and noteworthy. But there's a couple clear things here. There is nothing here emphasizing individual developers, nothing here kind of telling you what to play. It's just like, this is the newsworthy stuff. This is the stuff that's come out. This is what's here. You can scroll down and see deals and sales. And there's a hilarious long running gamer joke that's about your pile of shame, which there's a couple different things that are pile of shame. But in terms of the video game space, it's the games you bought on sale because they were $5 or $2 that you've never played. And that's one case where the developers and Steam are just making free money because they make things accessible. It's just there. People can watch for these sales. And sure, from a seller perspective, you could say, oh, I lost money because my game sold for $5 and not 60. But it was money you weren't going to get otherwise. So you could take the 5 and a lot of it all over the world, or you could be upset and never ever reduce your prices below 60. So it's again that like reaching different markets broadly in a way that is consumer centric just gets you money. Just saying. So yeah, then we've got the categories option. We've got the different hardware, so you can actually look at the different pieces. Not only you can buy them here and order them to get delivered, but it also shows you what games work on those pieces of hardware. Because the Steam Deck can't run everything, VR can't run everything, but if you're looking for stuff to play on those, this has the subcategory to find it. And that's just one example of how easy it is to find this. Now, there's one thing I really wanted to highlight. I'm going to look at the top sellers, and I can find this immediately. I know exactly where to go to find a specific kind of product. And there's one thing I really wanted to highlight here, and that is that the top 5 games here, Valve, the company that owns Steam, didn't make any of them. And that's going to come back up in a minute when we look at one of the top competitors with Steam. But I want to highlight this because you get your top 5 products, and these are top 5 in revenue, by revenue. These are the games making the most money on the largest gaming store platform in the world. And that's also a really hugely important point to highlight is when you go for that exclusivity, when you go for saying only our platform ever, you don't get the broad user data. You only know how much time and money people are spending with your products. Whereas Steam, very quietly, has data on what everyone is playing across every single product everywhere across the world. They have a vast array of data, of user data, to kind of influence their business decisions. Just they have that information. To my knowledge, they don't abuse it too much. They just have it and can change things and update things based on that. And if you're only selling your product and only know about your individual niche in the market, you're losing out on that. And it's especially in a case like this where it's a virtual store with virtual products. There is no reason to only stock your stuff, aside from trying to make things difficult for your consumers, which is not a good approach. So, one thing I really wanted to highlight here too is again, actually, I think Counter-Strike may be made by Valve. Anyway, one of the core pieces I haven't really touched on why Prime or Amazon Gaming was trying to get into this, and it's one really key example is right here with Marvel Rivals. A couple things. Valve didn't make that. Amazon Gaming didn't make that. A small developer made that in partnership with Marvel. So they already have a built-in franchise. They have a built-in fan base. They have all this money and all of this pre-built marketing infrastructure in here that goes towards it being a Marvel game and a high-ticket Marvel game and one that just came out. And it's one of those things where Steam can just ride that. They say, here's our shelf space. You can pay a little bit to put Rivals on it, get people in there. And it doesn't cost anything to install and play Marvel Rivals. It is free. It is a free game. And now the way they're able to do that is that they sell in-game cosmetics, which I don't love, but we'll talk about that another day. But there are things you can buy in-game if you like it, if you want to, and those make a lot of money. Because if you give people things to make them personalize their gaming experience, if they like the game and play it a lot, they're going to spend money. A little trickle of money basically all the time. There's a new skin, there's a new weapon skin, there's a new map, there's a new single player experience. There are things you can spend money on all the time. And instead of shelling out $60 to $70 day one, you could shell out hundreds of dollars over a couple of years because you're buying little things here and there all over the place. It's a massive, massive moneymaker and a huge financial market. And that is why so many companies are trying to beat Steam and trying to do this. And that's why it matters that they do this correctly and do it well. Because if you fail, you get nothing. And if you go to market with some of these flawed approaches, you get nothing. Whereas if you go to it understanding the market, not breaking the thing that's working, you can do really well. And so that's one of the cases where it's a little bit disappointing for Prime Gaming, I'm sure, that they didn't break into this market. But you can look from the outset and see some very big missteps they made and some very, frankly, obvious things they could have done better. And I wanted to highlight that too. So that's that. This is Steam. I'm going to go ahead and look at some of the competitors. This is Prime Gaming. Now, immediately, right out of the gate, I see 5 games. And what really a big bummer is that this is duplicated. They have 2. They have the same one listed twice. Now, it's listed twice because it is both on Windows and it's on Xbox, but just do the one and have people choose their platform. Don't have both. That's just silly. But another thing, too, is where is my navigation here? I've got my account option on the top right, but I don't have subcategories of stores. I don't have different categories here. I just have very, very basic information. There's free games, cloud games. It's so basic. And they're like, here's our free stuff. You should play our free stuff. And again, a lot of these are licensed through other companies, Epic Games, Good Old Games. They're just pulling free stuff that other sites are offering and putting it on their platform and advertising it as if it's theirs. I appreciate that they did at least say, hey, this is where it's coming from. But, I mean, it really looks like they're not trying. And these are great, but yeah, cross advertising Twitch. But like even here, I've scrolled way down and there's no way for me to interact with this. I can't change the view. I can't choose what I'm looking for. There's a search for a specific title, but they're not promoting anything. They're not showing me sales. They're only showing me the free stuff that they're not even doing. And I mean, there's something to be said for this. But if you look at Steam for 5 minutes as a consumer, like what am I here to do? What am I here to buy? How am I here to interact with this? You could see immediately that this falls flat. It's very clean, it's very presentable, it's very pretty, and all of those approaches, of course, make sense from a design perspective, but from a functional perspective, it doesn't work. it doesn't do what I need it to. And that's more important. It doesn't matter how pretty it is if it doesn't work. And we'll go ahead and touch on Stadia. This one, oh man. Yeah, so this is Google's approach where they did that stream gaming thing where people could use remote Google servers to play games without using the advanced hardware. Also, one that most people didn't even know about. So, of course, it didn't work out well because people didn't know it was a thing. They didn't market it well. They didn't advertise about it well. They just kind of put it out there and assumed that people would try it because they're Google, which I appreciate they were willing to experiment, but at a certain point, you do have to advertise. So, there's that part. And we're going to touch on briefly a couple other pieces too. So I want to talk about, well, hang on, actually. Two things I want to touch on real quick. So Prime Gaming is a subset of Prime. That's key too, because you only get access to Prime Gaming if you're an Amazon Prime member, if you pay money for Prime. So that's a barrier for entry. You have to pay money every month just to have access to this stuff and continue to have access to your library of games. That's not true for Steam. Steam is free. I never have to pay anything for that. I never have the risk of losing my library of games because I'm not paying for the monthly subscription. That's huge and a huge misstep that Prime Gaming made. And it was, I assume, a top level leadership decision where every service they had to be in service of their subscription service. You have to encourage people to stay on paying the whatever it is per month. And that hamstrings it. Like if you're going to market to compete with a free platform that does your stuff better, why would anyone pay a monthly fee to use your platform that doesn't solve those problems and costs money? And the thing is too that they could have made a lot of money making Prime Gaming successful, a lot more than they would have made in those subscriptions. Because I very much doubt anyone is keeping Amazon Prime because of Prime Gaming. They may keep it for other reasons and then have the bonus of Prime Gaming, but then it's still not doing the service. They're not getting that increase in revenue from Prime Gaming that they're trying to get. And another touchback on Stadia, one of the bigger challenges to having the remote streaming games is you are now responsible as the owner of the hardware for making sure that every single thing you list on the program follows specific rules. You have to make it the platform able to host these games. And so something I found out relatively recently was to host a game on Stadia, you had to have a specific graphics framework built into your game. And a lot of developers just weren't willing to do it. There was no reason for them to put in the extra development time and to kind of crack their game in some ways to make it work on Stadia. There was no point. And that is one of the biggest reasons why Stadia failed is games either couldn't or wouldn't even use it. They couldn't even put their stuff on the shelf there, which, come on. Anyway, found that out recently, and some games now, even if you start them, they say, hey, do you want to run it with this graphics processor, this one? Stadia did that. So even after Stadia shut down, I still don't like it because it's mucking up my game experience off of Stadia. Crazy. So yeah. Netflix also has their mobile gaming as well. They're not really investing as much in it, and they're kind of pulling back from it, but it is here. Specifically mobile, small games, mostly kid-focused. Yeah, it's there. So they have it, and people can spend money on it if they want, but they're not really pushing it either because they've kind of backed off as well. So these are three big media giants that have given up on this space because they couldn't figure it out, because they all made the same mistakes. Now, finally, we have one that's actually kind of a competitor and has been around for a lot longer than Steam. And this is actually funny, where this is the original competitor that Steam went to market to beat. And this is Blizzard, Blizzard, Activision, Blizzard, whatever they are now, their own Battle.net, which started way back when with like the original Warcraft series with StarCraft, way back when, to give people a place to play games online. It was brilliant at the time. It was very innovative at the time, but it made a couple core mistakes. The number one being that exclusivity. So the mistake of exclusivity goes way back in this industry to the very beginning, where again, every time you walk in their store, every time a consumer walks in the store is giving them a reason to walk out because they don't have everything the consumer wants. So of course I can come in here and be like, we've got this variety of games, you got stuff from multiple developers, like you got good stuff here. Well, I'm going to leave to play this other hot game that came out because you guys didn't make it and you're not selling it. And that's where Steam beats the heck out of Battle.net, and where Battle.net is never going to actually beat Steam. It just can't. So, and another thing too, like same problem with Prime Gaming. I'm looking at this, I've got the banner on the top, and then immediately they're selling the same thing twice. Like you could pay even more for this new game that we only own, or I could also get that on Steam. And then what's crazy here too is if I go down to this, say I come to this looking for games. I want to buy games. I either want to play the games I already have or buy a new game. Every single thing in this store Like, okay, this is an actual game. But most of this is expansion packs. It's in-game currency. It's stuff that I don't want. Like this entire store basis is spending money I don't have to play and enjoy the games. And this is where a lot of revenue is coming from. But as a consumer, it's also icky. Even if I were to spend money on this stuff, I wouldn't feel good about it. I wouldn't be getting great new content out of it. I'd be able to see my hand look different in a couple of these games sometimes. It's a huge miss where this is a company that actually, look at this. Here we go. Let's see. Premium edition bonuses. You get a digital art book and a soundtrack. Great. Thanks, guys. That's great. I'll pay another $100 for that. Um, yeah, and this is one of the saddest stories it's the saddest business story. It's one of the sadder gaming stories in that Blizzard just fell completely on this. They were the first company to market. They could have been the original Steam. They kind of were. They really could have been the first to be there. They could have beaten Steam before Steam even happened, and they didn't because they fell on some basic mistakes, and they've continued to go downhill since. Where they're doubling and tripling down on their highest revenue pieces, which makes sense, but that's costing them much bigger revenue, much more audience retention, much more goodwill in the marketplace they're trying to win. So Blizzard is still doing well, but it is nothing compared to what it used to be, and it owned this market originally. Steam was the newcomer that competed with BattleNet. Steam was the BattleNet competitor. BattleNet was the gorilla in the market, and they just let it slide. And that's one of the great shout-outs to Steam is they've done a really good job of maintaining their space in the market because they don't make any of these core mistakes. They focus on being functional, being approachable, and meeting the needs of their consumers. Excuse me. Something that they know of more because they're more involved with the community and they again host things from different sources so they're able to get more user data and understand their market better, which these narrow competitors don't. I've been rambling for a bit. That was kind of the big piece, but it's yeah, this is just a really interesting comment I wanted to make. And again, this was specifically about gaming, but it's very specific about a market, about a niche, about a place where you could make a lot of money, and about one of the kind of biggest problems with the market approach that big companies make is, again, assuming they're big and successful in one space, so they will be in every other one. This is a terrific opportunity to kind of look at this and understand, like, hey, they messed up here. These are the mistakes they made. What can I learn from these mistakes? How can I approach the market differently? Or if I were Steam, how could I solidify my market base and my position here against competitors like this? But also, what can I learn from their mistakes about what we're doing right and what we can maybe do better? So, anyway, that's it. That was my ramble. Hopefully, this was useful. Thank you again to Ethan Evans for making the original post. Thank you, of course, to Gunjit Singh for making my personal favorite comment on here. And yeah, let me know what you think. Cheers.